and we're going to be doing a theatrical enactment for you of an H.R. 1 debate based on a speech by Arizona State Legislator John Kavanagh. Welcome, everyone. My name is Ben, and welcome, Rob. Rob's my guest today, and we're going to be talking about H.R. 1. Thanks so much for coming, Rob.
Well, thank you for having me, Ben. What's the H.R. 1 bill and election reform are pretty critical and pretty critically important for our democracy. And the conversation that we're having today, it's really important to have. So appreciate the chance for us to share our views on this.
Yeah, I'm really glad that we can talk about this. I know we don't we don't agree, but it'll be interesting to talk about it. So for me, there's a fundamental difference between Democrats and Republicans. Democrats value as many voters as possible, and they're willing to risk fraud. Republicans are more concerned about fraud, so we don't mind putting security measures in that won't let everybody vote. But everybody shouldn't be voting. Not everybody wants to vote. And if somebody is uninterested in voting, that probably means they're totally uninterested in learning anything about the policy and the issues. Quantity is important, but we have to look at the quality of the voting as well. Wouldn't you say?
Well, Ben, you made a number of points there. I'm going to see how many I can get to in the time I have to respond. So, and again, I appreciate we're having this conversation. You care about making sure that we have, free and fair elections that where there isn't fraud. We both care about that. The vast majority of the people, that's what they want to see as well. And if you look at what happened in the 2020 election, that is essentially what we had, is what you're saying we need to have. And you had people across the political spectrum, election officials, politicians who were in charge of overseeing the elections, who said that it was a very secure election in spite of the pandemic. And that was, when we were taking a lot of the measures to make it easier to vote when a lot of people had to vote remotely. You had Republicans, including former Attorney General Barr, who said that there was no evidence of widespread election fraud that would have changed the outcome of the election anywhere. You had Christopher Krebs from the Homeland Security Department saying that the 2020 election, where we had this expanded access to voting, that this was still the most secure election in the history of the U.S. So a lot of the concerns about voter fraud that we're looking at right now and that are leading to some of the restrictive voting measures come from former President Trump and his making the allegations about voter fraud that a lot of his supporters find, because they come from Trump, they're indisputable. And that's where, and the concerns about voter fraud really come from there. But based on the evidence that we just showed, they really don't have any basis in reality.
Well, now wait a second here, because I can show you the voter fraud database from the Heritage Foundation. This is 1,317 instances of voter fraud. You can't tell me this is made up.
Well, you're right. I can't tell you that it is 100% made up, entirely made up. And again, you care about making sure that we don't have fraud. Good for you for doing some research on this and for doing your homework, and good for the Heritage Foundation for the work that they've done to investigate this some more. But Ben, you know what the Heritage Foundation found in 2016, for example, in the presidential election, with the evidence they found there. What we're putting on our screen right now shows that there were 63 cases of voter fraud in 2016. Not 63,000, not 63 million, 63. And that's a very tiny number in the grand scheme of 134.5 million people voting in the presidential election of 2016. So voter fraud numbers, very, very tiny. On the opposite end, if you want to look at the numbers of the impact of different forms of voter suppression, if you take the 2018 gubernatorial election in Georgia, for example, you had about between 600 and 700,000 voters purged from the voting rolls in Georgia in 2017, the year before that election, and through things like they were just purged from the rolls, or there were applications for ballots that weren't properly processed in a prompt and timely manner, and the outcome was, Brian Kemp won. It would have taken just 25,000 more votes for Stacey Abrams to have triggered a runoff in that election, and that's a tiny fraction. The difference between Brian Kemp and Stacey Abrams was a tiny fraction of that big number of cases of people being purged from the voter rolls, or applications for ballots not being accepted. If you also look at the presidential election in Wisconsin in 2016, you had about 200,000. There was a story that where research was done that showed that if Wisconsin hadn't implemented more harsh and strict measures to restrict voting, about 200,000 more people would have been able to vote. Evidence suggests a number of those people would have been people of color, people who were, who were poor. Donald Trump's margin of victory was about around 20,000 in that election. So, and again, small margin of victory compared to the 200,000 people who might otherwise have been able to vote in that election. So, the numbers of people impacted by voter suppression compared to the differences in the margins of victory in a couple of those elections, voter suppression has had a huge impact on elections. Voter fraud, very tiny impact.
Okay, all right. So let's say that that's true. Well, I mean, don't we want to think about, as I was saying before, the quality of voters? Don't we want to think about, I mean, shouldn't it be, if somebody really wants to vote, if they're really serious about it and they've done their work, shouldn't they have to try harder?
Well, Ben, I appreciate that you're raising this issue. The evidence that's out there really suggests, though, it isn't because people aren't trying. That there are economic burdens placed on with these restrictive voting laws that are placed on people who are living in poverty, and and many people of color in the areas where they live. They have to stand in in long lines to complete many of the steps to register. Many of them don't have access to transportation, so they don't drive. They don't have a reason to have a driver's license, in a lot of other cases. And if they're going to get a voter ID, well, the fees they may have to pay for the voter ID or to complete other steps to register, at the time they do that, if you're in a low income situation, that might be the difference between maybe, like, you might be choosing between taking steps to register to vote or between getting your medications for that month, getting groceries for that month, paying your rent on time for that month. Think about it. In the United States of America, those are the choices that we're placing on people for voting. And the evidence there's a lot of stories out there that really show how informed these people are, and they're shocked by all the things that they, like, all of a sudden they've become ineligible to vote when they've never had issues with maintaining their eligibility before. Now, that doesn't sound like, you're talking about the quality of elections. Those sound like the things that we criticize nations like Zimbabwe and China and Iran for doing in their elections. We're the original democracy here. That doesn't seem like what we want to have for our elections here.
Okay, Rob. All right. Calm down here, okay? I think we're going to have to agree to disagree. Thank you so much for coming on my show. I don't really agree with you, but I appreciate you coming on here. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you for having me, Ben. We do have some disagreements, but this is a vitally important discussion to have. Making sure we maintain access to voting for people is critically important to our democracy, and we need to talk about what's all involved in that and the ramifications of that.
So that was our scene. I'm Ben again.
And I'm Rob.
And we're just going to take...
And I can promise that Ben does not want our elections to be conducted like the way they do in all those countries I mentioned.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for vouching for me, Rob. Okay. So we want to just go over briefly with everybody really quickly some of the strategies of deception that were used by my character. And if you notice any that were used by either of us, feel free to send us a message. Feel free to, find us on Twitter or email us, info@causeconscience.org. You can even send us a text. So feel free to message us, chat us, let us know what's up. And so we're going to start with the strategies of deception. What, Rob, did you notice about the strategies of deception as we were going?
Well, if one of the things we have up here are the wrong priorities strategy. And, if you compare the tiny number of voter fraud cases to the huge number of voter suppression cases, the people opposing HR1 are focused on something that's very tiny versus the thing that's large, and and they also they kind of push the fear hot button too.
Yeah.
When you talk about fraud, and especially when fraud doesn't exist, but that that gets people scared when you start talking about fraud and risking fraud, that does get people scared. It gets people scared about something that really is it's a molehill kind of a problem, though.
Yeah, when I was saying Democrats value as many people as possible voting, and they're willing to risk fraud, right? That's really it's like I'm sounding the alarm bell, right, from the tower, but it's actually not true. One thing in some prior iterations this we'd worked on, you would point out that if you don't have an ID, you have to sign an affidavit. It's not like there's no consequences if you vote illegitimately.
That's right. Yeah.
If anybody notices anything in this video that was a strategy of deception, feel free to share it in the comments if we didn't get to it. We're just going to briefly now talk about cherry picking, because there was some cherry picking here. What kind of cherry picking is going on here?
Well, I mean, again, to go back to the the 63 cases of voter fraud versus the hundreds of thousands of cases of voter suppression in the couple examples we talked about, and how small the voter fraud is compared to the number of people who voted. And it was interesting when we like the Heritage Foundation, all about those 63 examples, and we don't have this up here now, but I was noticing when we were pulling up the Heritage Foundation's website to put this together, that they not only is voter suppression not talked about as something that it's important, but they are actually talking about suppressing the idea of voter suppression, no pun intended. But one of their headlines was, voter suppression is a myth, but it's an article of faith to liberals. So definitely some cherry picking going on.
Right. They don't
Foundation website.
They don't talk about all the evidence that's against them.
They sure don't.
Right. Like, to say it's an article of faith to liberals is to discount the mountains of evidence for voter suppression.
Yeah.
It's to ignore what's there. So this was, also we had the fallacy of division here as well, which is where one says something. Oh no, we lost Rob. Okay. Where one says something is false, and when somebody says something, a part is false. Welcome back, Rob. When somebody says something is true for the whole, so it must also be true for either all or some of its parts. The example of that was, if somebody is uninterested in voting, that probably means they're totally uninformed on the issues, right? This piece right here, that isn't just because you're not interested in voting doesn't necessarily mean that you are uninformed or uninterested in learning about voting, right? Like, just because it's true that you're uninterested in the act of voting itself does not mean you're uninterested in learning about voting. So that was a fallacy. If you detect other fallacies in here, feel free to use these different websites. We're going to post the slides up in the link afterward. So you can find in the comments. We'll post these slides so you can take a look. If you find any fallacies in here, put the fallacies you notice in the comments, and we'd be glad to discuss them. And if you can think of any way that we can make the argument more rigorously argued, also feel free to share that. So we're going to wind up now. Again, if you have any feedback, feel free to email us, text us, leave a message in the video. We care about how this video was for you, so feel free to share with us if your experience on the video was positive, negative, or neutral. Feel free to let us know what brought you to watching this video, what kept you watching it, what were you hoping to get out of the video, what matters to you in watching our videos. Let us know that so we can improve our work. And one more thing.
Yeah, and also something that we would be remiss if we did not mention. HR 1 is moving its way through Congress as we speak. It's passed the House. It's going through the Senate right now. You all have probably noticed how evenly divided the Senate is, and there's some talk figuring out what they're going to do with the filibuster. So it really is kind of a toss-up right now with what happens with HR 1 in the Senate, and your voice could definitely make a difference. So there is a number, the number you see on our screen. If you call 202-224-3121, you can ask to get connected to the senator from your state. And if you're, we hope that you've got an understanding of what this is trying to do to really, enhance democracy and maintain democracy for everybody, with voting access and other important election reform. So, please tell your senator that you support this bill.
Yeah, I called my senator the other day, actually both my senators, and reached out to their office. It was a quick, easy experience. It could have taken 3 minutes for all I knew. And it was so easy. It takes just a second to do, and it makes such a difference. Also, remind them about the filibuster. If people didn't notice, Joe Biden came out the other day in favor of a talking filibuster. We're not going to be able to pass this unless we deal with a filibuster. And so feel free to remind your senator, your congresspeople about the talking filibuster, and that you support either getting rid of the filibuster altogether, or you support having a talking filibuster, making it harder for people to block the majority. All right. Thank you so much, Rob. This has been such a joy, as always.
Yeah, well, this is an important conversation that we're having, and it's about our the access to the vote is a bedrock principle of our democracy, and important that we push forward to make sure that all our voices are heard with that. Really,
it's so important. So thank you so much, everyone, for watching. Again, if you have any questions, if you have any comments, feel free to share them. And we'll be catching you soon. And let us know if you want to get involved. Thanks so much, everyone.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in.
Thanks a lot.